My name is Darin Fletcher, 68 years old, and I never thought my only son would empty my bank accounts and dump me in a nursing home like yesterday's trash. After 40 years working construction, saving every penny for a comfortable retirement, I found myself abandoned with nothing but a plastic bag of clothes. The staff here called me another sad case, but they had no idea what I was about to do. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from, and hit that subscribe button while I tell you how I turned the tables. I guess to understand how deeply this betrayal cut me, you need to know what my son Jackson meant to me. He was my whole world after his mother Margaret died. Breast cancer took her when Jackson was just 8 years old. I still remember the night I had to tell him Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. His little face crumpled up, and I promised right then that I would always be there for him, that I would give him the best life possible, and I tried my absolute hardest to keep that promise. Construction work was all I knew, so I took every shift I could get. Double shifts, weekend work, holiday pay. My hands would be cracked and bleeding most nights, my back screaming in pain, but I never complained, not once, because every dollar meant something better for Jackson. We had some beautiful times together despite everything. I taught him to fish down at Lake Sherwood when he was 10. The first time he caught a bass, you would have thought he'd won the lottery. His smile was so big, it barely fit on his face. When he was 12, we built a treehouse together in the backyard oak. Nothing fancy, just some scrap lumber from job sites, but he called it his castle. By 14, he was helping me fix up the old Ford truck in the driveway, learning which wrenches to hand me before I even asked. I never remarried, never even dated. Some of the guys at work tried setting me up a few times, but I always declined. Being both father and mother to Jackson took everything I had. There just wasn't room for anyone else. My boss, Tom, used to tell me I was making a mistake, that I needed something for myself. Maybe he was right, but I never regretted putting Jackson first. Not until now, anyway. The proudest day of my life was Jackson's high school graduation. My boy was valedictorian. Valedictorian. A construction worker's kid with no mom. I sat in that auditorium crying like a baby when he got up to give his speech. He thanked me publicly, said everything he achieved was because of my sacrifices. The other parents patted my shoulder. I felt like the richest man in the world that day. Jackson got accepted to a fancy business school in Chicago. The tuition nearly gave me a heart attack, but I made it work. Took the most dangerous high-rise jobs because they paid premium rates. Worked 100 feet up, walking steel beams in all weather. My foreman said I was crazy, but those jobs paid for textbooks and housing and meal plans. 4 years of terror for me, but Jackson graduated with honors and landed a job at some big financial firm right there in Chicago. He met Sophia during his senior year of college. Smart girl, studying to be a pharmacist. The first time he brought her home, I saw the way they looked at each other and knew wedding bells weren't far off. They married a year after graduation, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Sunday dinners at their first little apartment, fishing trips to Michigan in the summer, Christmas at my place. Jackson seemed like the same thoughtful, grateful boy I raised. All those years of hard work had one purpose beyond Jackson: retirement. I brown-bagged my lunch every day for 40 years. Never bought new clothes unless the old ones were unwearable. Drove the same truck for 25 years, fixing it myself whenever it broke down. I put money away systematically, investing carefully based on advice from a client whose house I'd helped build. By the time I turned 65, I had over $800,000 saved. Not a fortune by rich folks' standards, but enough for what I wanted. A modest cabin by a lake, a small fishing boat, and years of peaceful retirement, volunteering with Habitat for Humanity. The first signs that something had changed in Jackson appeared gradually. The modest apartment he and Sophia started in became a McMansion in the suburbs. The practical sedan was traded for a German luxury car. Vacations went from weekend getaways to European tours. I never commented on it. His money was his business, and he seemed to be doing well at his firm. But something in his eyes had changed. The humble, grateful boy was disappearing behind designer suits and status symbols. I noticed he became impatient with my simple ways. When I visited their new house, he seemed embarrassed by my work clothes and calloused hands. He would interrupt my stories or change the subject when I talked about the old days. Sophia would give him looks when he did this, and I occasionally overheard them arguing about money when they thought I was asleep in the guest room. Then came my health scare. Nothing major, just a mini stroke after working outside in 90-degree heat. Stupid of me, at my age, but old habits die hard. I spent 3 days in the hospital, and the doctors said I needed someone to keep an eye on me for a few weeks during recovery. That's when Jackson suggested I move into their guest house temporarily. Looking back, that moment was when everything began to unravel. The first 2 weeks at Jackson and Sophia's guest house seemed perfect. We ate meals together on their enormous patio, watched baseball games in Jackson's home theater room. He checked on me regularly, bringing medications and asking how I was feeling. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a caring son. But subtle changes started creeping in. Jackson began bringing up concerns about my ability to manage my finances after the stroke. The doctors said cognitive effects can linger. "Dad," he would say, his voice dripping with false concern, "let me help you keep things organized until you're back to 100%. Then came the documents. Always when I was taking my medication, when my thinking was foggy. Just quick signatures needed for insurance, he claimed. Updates to my accounts for security reasons. Simple paperwork that couldn't wait. I signed without reading carefully. My son was a financial professional after all. Who better to trust? About a month into my stay, Jackson suggested we set up joint bank accounts, just to help manage bills while you recover, he explained. This way I can make sure nothing falls through the cracks. It made sense at the time. I agreed. 6 weeks in, I noticed something odd while reviewing my bank statement. Several large transfers had gone out to accounts I didn't recognize. When I asked Jackson about them, he had elaborate explanations ready. Those are the investment opportunities I told you about, remember? The high-yield municipal bonds? Or, that's just account consolidation, Dad. We're streamlining your portfolio for better returns. He would speak quickly, using financial jargon he knew I didn't fully understand, then change the subject to something trivial. My isolation increased gradually. My friend Thomas from the construction crew tried visiting 3 times. Each time, Jackson turned him away at the door. "Dad's not up for visitors today. Doctor's orders. He needs rest." Thomas eventually stopped trying. My cell phone mysteriously disappeared from my nightstand. "The ringing causes stress, Dad. Not good for your blood pressure. Use the house phone if you need anything." But the house phone was in the main house, not the guest house. I had to walk across the property to make a call, which became increasingly difficult as my medication was increased. Just for a little while, Jackson insisted when I complained about the stronger dosage. "Doctor wants to make sure you're getting enough rest." One evening, I was dozing in the guest house when voices from the open patio doors woke me. Jackson and someone else talking. "We can get at least $400,000 for the old man's house in this market," Jackson was saying. "Then we move him somewhere cheaper and pocket the difference. He'll never know the difference with the medication he's on." My blood ran cold. I tried to tell myself I had misheard, that Jackson would never do such a thing. But the next day, I attempted to log into my online banking and discovered all my passwords had been changed. When I asked Jackson about it, he became irritable. "I told you, Dad, I'm handling all that until you're better. Don't worry about it." A week later, I was sitting in the guest house when I saw 2 people in business attire walking around my actual house across town. I recognized the woman as a real estate agent from her photo on bus bench advertisements. When I confronted Jackson that evening, he dismissed my concerns. "Just getting some appraisals for insurance purposes, Dad. Property values have changed, and we need to make sure you're properly covered." I didn't believe him, but what could I do? I was becoming increasingly dependent on Jackson and Sophia. My medication made me groggy most of the day. My friends had stopped calling. My access to my finances had been cut off. And oddly, Despite the recovery period extending from weeks into months, my physical health was actually improving while my psychological dependence was increasing. I began to feel like a prisoner in luxurious surroundings. The guest house was beautiful, but I noticed the exterior door had been fitted with a new lock that required a key from both sides. "Security upgrade," Jackson explained when I asked. But I couldn't find the key anywhere in the guest house. I was effectively locked in unless someone from the main house came to let me out. My confusion and fear grew daily. I started hiding my medication instead of taking it, pretending to swallow the pills, then spitting them out later. My head began to clear, and with clarity came horror at what was happening. But I still couldn't believe my own son would deliberately harm me. There had to be some explanation. One night, I managed to sneak into the main house while they were having a dinner party. I found Jackson's office unlocked and began searching through his desk. What I found sent ice through my veins. Documents showing my house had been listed for sale. Power of attorney forms with my signature that I had no memory of signing. Bank statements showing systematic transfers from my accounts to ones I didn't recognize. I confronted him the next morning, papers in hand. His expression changed from surprise to something cold and calculating. "You're confused, Dad," he said slowly, as if talking to a child. "You agreed to all this. The stroke affected your memory more than you realize. We should get you to the doctor." The look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before. My son was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. That night, I overheard Jackson and Sophia arguing fiercely. "This has gone too far," she was saying. "Your father needs real help, not what you're doing." Jackson's response chilled me. "He's got plenty of money he never spends anyway. He owes us after all I've done. Just stay out of it." I realized then that, whatever was happening, Sophia wasn't fully on board, but she wasn't stopping it either. I was on my own, and something told me time was running out. The day everything changed permanently was a Thursday morning in October. Jackson came to the guest house earlier than usual, all smiles and cheerful energy. "Got you a doctor's appointment, Dad. Just a checkup, to see how you're progressing." The car ride was silent and tense. I noticed we were heading to an unfamiliar part of town, away from my regular doctor's office. "New specialist," Jackson explained curtly when I asked. We pulled up to a building with a faded sign reading Whispering Pines Care Center. The landscaping was neglected, paint peeling from the trim. Nothing like the upscale medical facilities Jackson normally insisted on. "This doesn't look like a doctor's office," I said, hesitating to get out of the car. "It's a medical center with specialized rehabilitation services," Jackson replied, his voice tight. "Come on, we're running late." Inside, the medicinal smell hit me immediately, along with something else. Neglect, understaffing. The reception area had stained carpet and outdated furniture. An overwhelmed receptionist barely looked up as Jackson approached the desk. He already had paperwork in hand, I realized. This had been planned. Jackson rushed through the forms with the administrator, a tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes. When I tried asking questions, Jackson would answer for me. "Dad's still a bit confused from his stroke. I'll handle this." The administrator barely looked at me, just at the paperwork and the credit card Jackson presented. "It's just for physical therapy, Dad," Jackson assured me, as they prepared to show me to a room. "Just a few weeks, to get you back to 100%. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He gave me an awkward side hug, nothing like his usual embraces. "I need to get your wallet for the insurance cards," he said, smoothly taking it from my jacket pocket. "I'll keep it safe until I pick you up." And then he was gone. No proper goodbye. No explanation of when he'd return. Just my son walking briskly to his luxury car, without a backward glance. The room they took me to was nothing like Jackson had described. No private rehabilitation suite, just a dingy shared room with 2 twin beds separated by a threadbare curtain. The walls had water stains, the single window looked out at a brick wall, and the television was missing buttons on the remote. My roommate was an elderly man who appeared to be in his 90s, with an oxygen tank and labored breathing that filled the small space. He didn't acknowledge me when I greeted him. The attendant who showed me in tossed my plastic bag of hastily packed clothes onto the bare mattress. "Dinner's at 5, she said, already turning to leave. "There must be some mistake," I called after her. "My son said this was for physical therapy. I'm supposed to have a private room." She paused in the doorway, a flash of pity crossing her face. "Honey, this ain't that kind of place. This is a long-term care facility. Basic care, shared rooms." She hesitated, then added more softly, "We see this a lot. Family says it's temporary, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, just gave a small shrug before walking away. That first night was the longest of my life. The mattress was covered in plastic that crinkled with every movement. The pillow was flat as a pancake. My roommate's breathing and occasional moaning made sleep impossible. I lay awake until dawn, trying to make sense of what had happened. Surely there was a misunderstanding. Jackson would come tomorrow and clear everything up. But Jackson didn't come the next day. Or the day after. When I asked to use the phone to call him, I was told phone privileges were limited to 10 minutes weekly for residents, without premium care packages. When my turn finally came 5 days later, Jackson's responses were curt and dismissive. "I'm really busy at work, Dad. The facility is taking good care of you, right?" "No, they're not. This is a nursing home, not a rehabilitation center. When are you coming to get me?" "Soon, Dad. I need to get some things in order first. Look, I've got to go. Client meeting. I'll call you in a few days." He didn't call. I tried reaching him during my next phone session, but the call went straight to voicemail. As days turned into weeks, I began to understand the terrible reality of my situation. Most residents at Whispering Pines were severe dementia patients. Despite being mentally sharp, I was treated the same way, spoken to like a child, decisions made for me, limited autonomy over even the smallest aspects of daily life. The one bright spot was Walter, my next roommate, after the first one passed away in the night. Walter had been a mailman for 40 years before a stroke left him in a wheelchair. Unlike most residents, his mind was as sharp as ever, and he had no patience for self-pity. "So your kid dumped you here. Join the club," he said the first day we met. "My daughter sold my house while I was still in the hospital, told me I couldn't live alone anymore. That was 4 years ago. She visits at Christmas, sometimes." Walter became my guide to life at Whispering Pines, showing me which staff members could be trusted, which meal options were least awful, and how to hold on to dignity in a place designed to strip it away. "Most folks just give up," he told me. "That's when this place kills you, when you surrender." 2 weeks after my arrival, the facility director requested a meeting. A stern woman with reading glasses on a chain. She informed me there was an issue with my payment. "Your son paid for 1 month," she explained. "He indicated he would be setting up automatic payments for continuing care, but that hasn't happened. We've been trying to reach him." "Join the club," I said bitterly. Her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Fletcher, is there anyone else we can contact about your situation? Other family members? Friends?" I gave her the names and numbers of my few remaining friends, but I already knew what would happen. When I asked about contacting Jackson's wife, Sophia, the director checked my file. "It says here, no visitors approved by family designee. Your son specifically indicated you weren't to have visitors." The pieces were falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. I tried calling Sophia directly during my next phone session, only to discover their home number had been disconnected. The cell number I had for her went straight to voicemail. I left a desperate message, but never heard back. The final confirmation of Jackson's betrayal came 3 weeks into my stay. A letter arrived from my bank, forwarded from my home address, warning of foreclosure proceedings. When I showed it to the facility administrator, she reluctantly revealed what she knew. "Your son provided paperwork giving him full financial control due to your diminished capacity," she explained, showing me documents with my signature. Signatures I had no memory of providing. That night, alone in my room while Walter was at his physical therapy session, I broke down completely. I had worked hard my entire life, saved diligently, planned carefully, only to end up abandoned in a cut-rate nursing home while my son stole everything I had built. The betrayal went beyond money. Jackson had stolen my dignity, my autonomy, my trust. My own flesh and blood had looked me in the eye and lied, had calculated and executed my financial and emotional destruction with cold precision. I cried until there were no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. And in the empty silence that followed, a tiny spark ignited somewhere deep inside me. A spark of something I thought had been extinguished forever. Fight. The first weeks after realizing the full extent of Jackson's betrayal were the darkest of my life. I barely ate, hardly spoke, just moved through the days like a ghost. The staff noted my depression in my chart and offered medication, which I refused. Pills had helped Jackson control me before. Never again. Walter watched my decline with growing frustration. One evening, after I'd ignored dinner completely, he wheeled his chair directly in front of mine, blocking my view of the window where I'd been staring blankly for hours. "You can die here or fight back," he said bluntly. "But do us all a favor and pick one. This moping around is depressing everyone." His harshness shocked me out of my stupor. Fight back how? I have nothing. No money, no phone, no transportation. My own son made sure I was completely helpless. Walter leaned forward. "First rule of being here, there's always a way to work the system. Second rule, staff are people too. Some of them actually give a damn." That conversation was the beginning of my resurrection. Walter introduced me to Grace, a night nurse who worked the graveyard shift. Unlike many staff members who were burned out or indifferent, Grace had maintained her compassion. When Walter told her my situation, she was genuinely outraged. "My grandfather got taken advantage of by a caregiver," she explained during a quiet moment on her shift. "By the time we discovered it, she'd stolen his savings and family heirlooms. No one would prosecute because he had dementia and made a poor witness. Grace broke the rules to let me use the office computer during her shifts when no one was around. Through careful online searches, I discovered my house had been sold just 2 weeks after I was admitted to Whispering Pines. The $800,000 I'd saved over my lifetime had vanished from my accounts. The only money I still had access to was $112 in a Christmas Club account Jackson apparently didn't know existed. "My brother Harold is a retired detective," Grace told me one night. "He volunteers with elder abuse cases now. Would you like to meet him?" Harold was a burly man, with a handlebar mustache and hands nearly as calloused as mine. He listened intently as I explained everything that had happened, taking notes in a small notebook. "This isn't my first rodeo with this kind of case," he said when I finished. "What your son did is criminal. Elder abuse, fraud, theft, exploitation." He brought me legal pads the next day, encouraging me to document everything I could remember: dates, account numbers, conversations with Jackson, the timeline of events leading to my abandonment. "Memory fades," he explained. "Get it all down now while it's fresh." As I worked through my timeline, Harold did some preliminary investigating. What he discovered was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. "Your son may have done this before," he told me during one of his visits. "There are complaints from elderly clients at his firm about unauthorized transactions. Nothing prosecuted yet, but where there's smoke." Meanwhile, Walter was sharing knowledge gleaned from his brother, an attorney who specialized in elder law before his death. "Power of attorney can be revoked if it was obtained through deception," Walter explained. "And financial abuse of seniors is a priority for prosecutors these days. Too many cases, too much public outrage to ignore." Slowly, I found my purpose again. Not just survival, but justice. Not just enduring, but fighting back. Each day I felt stronger, more determined. The heavy fog of depression began to lift as I focused on documenting my case and building allies. And allies were emerging throughout Whispering Pines. Luis, the janitor who had witnessed countless residents abandoned by families, began smuggling in newspapers so I could search for any mentions of Jackson or his firm. Bernadette in the kitchen, whose own father had been financially exploited by a stepmother, made sure I got extra portions and the occasional fresh fruit that rarely appeared on regular resident trays. Grace helped me establish a new bank account for my meager $112, giving me a small sense of control again. "It's not much," I acknowledged when she brought me the paperwork. "But it's mine. Jackson can't touch it." One night, Grace took an even bigger risk. "I contacted your old neighbor Dorothy," she admitted. "The one you mentioned who always brought you Christmas cookies. She said she tried visiting you here but was turned away. She's been worried sick." 2 days later, Dorothy appeared during regular visiting hours, nervously glancing around as if expecting to be ejected at any moment. She brought my spare reading glasses that Jackson had left behind, and a handful of family photos she'd rescued from the trash after new owners moved into my house. "They threw out so many of your things, Darin," she said, tears in her eyes. "I saved what I could, but they had one of those big dumpsters in the driveway. It was heartbreaking." Dorothy also provided crucial information. Jackson and Sophia had abruptly moved away. Their house had been emptied and sat vacant with a realtor's sign out front. The neighbors said they were moving to Arizona for a job opportunity, but it all happened so fast. One weekend they were just gone. With Harold's help, I filed an official elder abuse report with the county authorities. The process was painful, requiring me to formally acknowledge that my own son had deliberately betrayed and abandoned me. But with each document filed, each statement given, I felt stronger. My first meeting with the county elder services representative was held in the facility's small conference room. Miss Patterson was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who recorded every word as I explained what had happened. "Unfortunately, Mr. Fletcher, your case isn't unique," she said. "But the documentation you've provided is more thorough than most. That will help immensely." Dorothy continued visiting regularly, bringing my mail that she'd collected from my old address. Some of it provided valuable evidence: bank statements, insurance notifications, even marketing materials from real estate companies, congratulating Jackson on his new property purchases. As word of my situation spread through Whispering Pines, more residents and staff joined my support network. Many had experienced similar betrayals or witnessed them, and my determination to fight back inspired them. "Most families get away with this stuff," one aide told me quietly. "It's good to see someone pushing back." Harold's connections proved invaluable. He located Patricia Moore, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, and was willing to take my case pro bono. "These cases make me angry enough to work for free," she explained during our first meeting. "My satisfaction comes from making the perpetrators pay." I found myself becoming an advocate not just for myself, but for other residents as well. I helped Walter draft a complaint about facility conditions. I assisted another resident in contacting her grandchildren after her son had cut off communication. The more I helped others, the stronger I felt. "You're not the same man who arrived here," Grace commented one evening as she brought my medication. "There's fire in your eyes now." She was right. The broken, bewildered old man Jackson had abandoned was gone. In his place was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal but strengthened by it, someone determined to see justice done. With attorney Patricia taking charge of my case, things began moving rapidly. Her first action was filing an emergency injunction to prevent Jackson from accessing any remaining assets in my name. "We don't know what's left," she explained, "but we need to freeze everything immediately before he liquidates anything else." Patricia brought in Martin Goldman, a forensic accountant, who volunteered his services after hearing my story. "My mother was in a similar situation," he explained. "I wish someone had fought for her, the way we're fighting for you." Martin's investigation revealed the shocking extent of Jackson's theft. Not just the $800,000 in savings, but also life insurance policies I'd maintained for decades, family heirlooms from my grandparents, and personal property I'd never even thought to itemize. One discovery hit me particularly hard. Jackson had sold my collection of 3 classic cars I'd restored myself, vehicles worth over $150,000 to the right buyers. "He sold them for $30,000 total," Martin reported grimly. Quick cash sale to a dealer who knew he was unloading stolen property. They were moved overseas immediately. Patricia filed paperwork requesting Jackson's work records, discovering he was already under investigation at his firm for client fund misappropriation. This works in our favor, she explained. It establishes a pattern of behavior, not just a one-time lapse in judgment. Dorothy continued providing invaluable help, finding old photo albums in her attic from neighborhood barbecues that clearly showed Jackson with me. For identification purposes, Harold explained, we need recent images to track him down. Harold called in a favor from Sam Winters, a private investigator friend still active in the field. Using financial records Martin had obtained, Sam tracked Jackson to Scottsdale, Arizona, where he had purchased a luxury condominium in a gated community. Paid cash, Sam reported. $2 million. Furniture delivered last month. A surprising development came when Patricia uncovered evidence suggesting Sophia might have left Jackson. Credit card records show she purchased a one-way ticket to Philadelphia 3 months ago, Patricia explained. She has family there, according to social media accounts. No travel records showing she ever went to Arizona. As evidence mounted, Patricia laid out my legal options. We have 2 paths, she explained, during a strategy meeting in the facility's conference room. Criminal charges through the district attorney for elder abuse, fraud, and exploitation, or civil recovery, suing to reclaim assets, or both. The decision weighed heavily on me. Despite everything, this was my son, the little boy I had raised alone, the child I had sacrificed everything for. Can I think about it? I asked Patricia. Walter was blunt when I shared my hesitation with him that evening. He left you to die here, he reminded me, while he lives in a $2 million condo bought with your life's work. He deserves every consequence coming to him. Deep down, I knew Walter was right. What Jackson had done wasn't a momentary lapse or a misunderstanding. It was calculated, sustained deception and exploitation of the person who had given him everything. The decision became clearer when the facility administrator joined our case after learning Jackson had also defrauded Whispering Pines, promising ongoing payments he never intended to make. Patricia contacted several journalists who specialized in elder abuse stories. Public pressure can help move cases like this through the system faster, she explained. When a reporter from the Chicago Tribune expressed interest, I felt a mix of validation and embarrassment. My private family tragedy would become public knowledge, but perhaps it would help others avoid similar fates. Our first major breakthrough came when a judge granted our motion to freeze Jackson's accounts in Arizona. He tried to transfer funds offshore when he got notice, Patricia told me, a grim smile of satisfaction on her face. But we caught it in time. Another shock came when Sam discovered Jackson had been using a slightly altered name in Arizona. Jackson F. Reynolds, instead of Jackson F. Fletcher, Sam explained. Just enough difference to create confusion, without technically being identity fraud. As the case built, I found my health improving. The purpose and hope that had returned to my life seemed to strengthen my body as well. I began taking walks around the facility grounds, regaining strength I had lost during my initial weeks of depression. I started joining community activities I had previously avoided, even helping organize a weekly card game for residents. Patricia warned me about the emotional difficulty ahead. If this goes to court, you'll have to face Jackson, she cautioned. Are you prepared for that? The question haunted me for days. Was I prepared to look my son in the eye after what he had done? To sit across from him in a courtroom and testify about his betrayal? The answer came to me during a quiet moment, watching the sunset from the facility's small patio. Yes, I was prepared. Not out of vengeance, but out of respect for myself and the life I had built. I decided to pursue both criminal charges and civil recovery. He needs to face consequences, I told Patricia. Not just for me, but for anyone else he might target in the future. Harold arranged for me to record video testimony about the betrayal, a precaution in case my health declined before we reached court. Breaking down during the filming was inevitable. The pain was still raw, still capable of bringing me to my knees. But I pushed through, determined to create a permanent record of what had happened. The Tribune ran their story about my case, focusing on the growing epidemic of elder financial abuse. Within days, tips began coming in from Jackson's former colleagues. He bragged about it, one anonymous source told Patricia. Said his old man had more money than he knew what to do with, so he was putting it to better use. Patricia began preparing for a hearing in Arizona, where we would confront Jackson directly. The logistics were complex. I would need transportation, accommodation, support during the proceedings. Harold volunteered immediately. "I'll drive you myself," he insisted. "All the way there and back." As the date approached, I found myself surprisingly calm. The initial shock and devastation had transformed into steely resolve. "I raised him better than this," I told Walter the night before my departure, "and I'm going to remind him of that fact." The journey to Arizona was the first time I'd left Whispering Pines in 8 months. Sitting in Harold's SUV as we pulled away from the facility, I felt both terrified and empowered. The world seemed larger and louder than I remembered, full of possibilities but also dangers. Harold seemed to sense my unease, keeping conversation light as we made our way southwest. Patricia flew ahead to prepare final arrangements, meeting us at a modest hotel near the courthouse. "Jackson's attorneys have already tried to get the case dismissed," she informed us. "Judge denied their motion. They know they're in trouble." The morning of the hearing arrived with desert sunshine streaming through the hotel curtains. I dressed carefully in clothes Dorothy had purchased for me, a simple blue suit that restored some of the dignity the institutional setting had stripped away. Harold drove us to the courthouse, where Patricia waited on the steps. "Ready?" she asked simply. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Walking into that courthouse was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Harder than burying my wife. Harder than working through pain and exhaustion for decades. This was confronting the most profound betrayal imaginable, looking it directly in the face. And then, suddenly, there he was. Jackson, standing near the courtroom entrance with 2 polished attorneys in expensive suits. He looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, when he saw me walking toward him under my own power, with my own legal team, genuine shock registered on his face. He clearly hadn't expected me to fight back, hadn't expected to ever see me again. He recovered quickly, stepping toward me with an expression of rehearsed concern. "Dad," he began, reaching out as if for an embrace. "I'm so glad you're okay. There's been a huge misunderstanding." I stepped back, avoiding his touch. Patricia moved slightly forward. "Mr. Fletcher will not be speaking with you outside of court proceedings," she said firmly. "Any communication can go through counsel." Jackson's face hardened momentarily before he composed himself. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I just want what's best for my father." "We'll talk through the court," I said quietly, the first words I'd spoken directly to my son in 8 months. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began with clinical efficiency. Patricia presented our case methodically. Bank records showing systematic emptying of my accounts, forged signatures on power of attorney documents, evidence of the hasty sale of my home and possessions, unpaid bills at Whispering Pines, despite Jackson's promises of payment. Jackson's attorneys attempted to paint me as mentally incompetent, suggesting the mini-stroke had affected my cognitive abilities more severely than I acknowledged. They produced selective medical records and tried to use my initial confusion after being abandoned as evidence of ongoing impairment. Patricia was ready. She called Dr. Levine, a neurologist who had examined me specifically for the case. "Mr. Fletcher shows no signs of cognitive impairment," he testified firmly. "His memory, reasoning, and executive function all test within normal to high ranges for his age group. There is absolutely no medical justification for the removal of his financial autonomy." Former colleagues of Jackson's testified about other potential victims, elderly clients whose accounts had shown unusual activity. One brave woman, a former assistant at his firm, described overhearing Jackson joke about old folks and their mattress money during a company happy hour. When Jackson took the stand, He was the picture of concerned son, his voice breaking at carefully timed intervals. He claimed he was simply protecting me from bad financial decisions after my health scare. The house was sold because it was too much for an elderly man to maintain. The nursing home placement was for specialized care unavailable elsewhere. The money was being managed for my benefit. But under Patricia's cross-examination, the facade crumbled. She produced records of luxury purchases made days after my abandonment. A $70,000 watch, a sports car, first-class tickets to Europe. Were these purchases also for your father's benefit? She asked pointedly. The judge, a woman in her 60s with penetrating eyes, watched Jackson closely throughout his increasingly flustered explanations. When Patricia showed evidence that he had drained my accounts within weeks of obtaining power of attorney, his excuses became less coherent. My own testimony was brief, but powerful. I spoke directly and clearly about my decades of hard work, my careful saving habits, and the absolute trust I had placed in my son. I described the moment I realized I had been abandoned, the gradual understanding that my own child had calculated and executed my financial destruction. There were no histrionics, no raised voice, just the devastating truth laid bare. The judge's comments during proceedings were minimal but telling. When Jackson claimed he had always acted in my father's best interest, she removed her glasses and stared at him for a long moment before saying simply, "Proceed." The most unexpected moment came when the courtroom doors opened during a brief recess, and Sophia walked in. My daughter-in-law, whom I hadn't seen since before my abandonment, had come forward voluntarily to testify. Jackson's face drained of color when he saw her. Sophia's testimony was damning. She described Jackson's growing gambling addiction, the massive debts he had hidden from everyone. She revealed that she had left him after discovering what he had done to me. He told me Darin had dementia and needed specialized care, she said, wiping tears. When I found out the truth, I couldn't stay. It wasn't just the lying, it was the cold calculation of it all. By the time final arguments concluded, the outcome seemed inevitable. The judge ordered the freezing of all Jackson's assets, pending full forensic accounting. She authorized the seizure of the Arizona property and any vehicles or luxury items purchased with my stolen funds. And most significantly, she referred the case to the district attorney for criminal charges. The evidence of elder abuse, fraud, and exploitation in this case is overwhelming, she stated firmly. This court finds that Darin Fletcher acted with premeditation to defraud his father of his life savings and abandon him in a care facility against his will, using deception to obtain control of his assets. When the bailiff approached to take Jackson into custody on the initial charges, the reality of consequences seemed to hit him for the first time. His careful composure crumbled completely. As they led him from the courtroom, we briefly found ourselves alone in the hallway, just a few feet apart, while attorneys conferred and the bailiff awaited paperwork. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, this time with genuine emotion. "I'm sorry. I got in so deep with the gambling. I needed the money. I was going to pay it all back." I looked at my son, handcuffed and finally facing the consequences of his actions, and felt a complex wave of emotions: anger, grief, pity, vindication. "I worked my fingers to the bone for you," I said quietly. "Gave you everything, and you threw me away like garbage." "I know," he whispered, tears flowing freely now. "I know." There was nothing more to say. The bailiff returned and led Jackson away. I watched my only child disappear down the courthouse hallway, knowing he faced years in prison for what he had done. The victory felt hollow, bittersweet. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. The case had captured public attention as a symbol of elder justice in a time of increasing awareness about senior exploitation. Patricia fielded most questions while I stood quietly beside her, overwhelmed by the cameras and microphones. One young reporter asked me directly, "How does it feel to win?" "This isn't about winning," I replied after a moment. "It's about right and wrong, about consequences for actions, about standing up when someone tries to throw you away." The return to Whispering Pines was nothing like my departure. I walked in not as a defeated, abandoned old man, but as someone who had fought back and prevailed. Staff and residents who had followed the case through news reports greeted me with applause. Walter grinned from his wheelchair. "Told you there was fight left in you," he said. The facility director approached me the next day with an unexpected offer. "The publicity from your case has brought attention to conditions here," she explained. "We've received donations and grants for improvements, and we'd like to offer you permanent residence at a significantly reduced rate in recognition of your role in these positive changes." I thanked her for the offer but told her I needed time to consider my next steps. For the first time in nearly a year, I had choices again. I had a future to plan. 6 months after the court case, I moved out of Whispering Pines into a modest senior apartment complex called Riverside Gardens. The partial recovery of my assets provided enough for comfortable but simple living. The biggest surprise was that Walter decided to join me. We became roommates, his disability benefits, and my recovered funds allowing us to share a 2-bedroom unit with a small patio overlooking a community garden. Harold and Grace became regular visitors, more like family than friends. Harold brought fishing gear and took me to local lakes on weekends. Grace brought home cooked meals and introduced me to her children and grandchildren, who adopted me as an honorary grandfather. The family I had lost was gradually replaced by one I had found through adversity. My days took on new routines centered around healing and purpose. Mornings began with coffee on the patio with Walter, discussing news or planning our day. Afternoons often involved volunteering with the local elder rights organization that had helped me, sharing my story with social workers and law enforcement to help them recognize signs of exploitation. The material losses still stung sometimes. 4 decades of careful saving had been reduced to a fraction of what I had accumulated. The house I had maintained so carefully belonged to strangers now. Family photos and heirlooms were gone forever. But I discovered an unexpected peace in letting go of possessions. What remained was enough, and more importantly, it was truly mine again. A surprising development came when Sophia reached out through Patricia. She had relocated to Philadelphia with her parents and wanted to reconnect. Our first meeting was awkward, both of us carrying the weight of Jackson's betrayal. But as she shared her own feelings of deception and guilt, a new understanding formed between us. "I should have done more to stop him," she said during one visit. "I suspected something was wrong but didn't want to believe it." "You left when you learned the truth," I reminded her. "That counts for something." The most unexpected revelation came during Sophia's 3rd visit. I had a grandchild I had never known about. "Jackson didn't want children yet," she explained. "But I became pregnant just before everything happened. I didn't tell him before I left." She showed me pictures of Alexander, a 6-month-old with my eyes and chin. "Would you like to meet him sometime?" she asked hesitantly. The joy of discovering I was a grandfather helped balance the ongoing pain of Jackson's betrayal. While my son served his prison sentence for elder abuse and fraud, I began building a relationship with the grandson he didn't know existed. Jackson sent letters from prison. The first few remained unopened in my drawer for weeks before I found the strength to read them. His words seemed genuinely remorseful, but it was impossible to separate true contrition from manipulation given our history. I responded briefly, neither accepting nor rejecting his apologies, simply acknowledging receipt. Working with the Elder Rights Organization became a central focus of my new life. I taught financial literacy workshops at senior centers, helping others protect themselves from exploitation. My case had received enough media attention that people recognized me sometimes, and my story lent credibility to the warnings about family financial abuse. "It's not always strangers you need to watch out for," I would tell the groups. "Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those you trust most." Patricia helped me establish a small trust fund for Alexander with some of the recovered money, structured so that Jackson could never access it. For college, I specified, an emergency needs only until he's 25. While most of my focus remained on building my new life, I couldn't completely avoid reflecting on what had happened with Jackson. Had I somehow failed as a father? Had my focus on providing materially come at the expense of teaching values? Or was his betrayal something that had always been inside him, a flaw I had failed to recognize? I discussed these questions with Walter, with Harold, with the counselor I began seeing monthly. There were no easy answers, but the consensus was clear. Nothing I had done or failed to do justified Jackson's actions. The responsibility was his alone. 9 months into his sentence, I finally agreed to visit Jackson in prison. The meeting was necessary for both of us, though painfully difficult. Seeing my son in a prison jumpsuit, thinner and older looking than his years, stirred complicated emotions. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, after we had exhausted small talk, "about who I became, about what I did to you." "And?" I prompted when he fell silent. "There's no excuse," he said simply. "The gambling addiction was real, but plenty of addicts don't steal from their parents and abandon them. I made choices, terrible choices. I'm so sorry, Dad." I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "I want you to know something," I said. "I'm rebuilding my life. I have a home. I have friends who became family when you threw me away. I'm okay despite what you did. I need you to understand that." Something like relief crossed his face. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I've worried about that." The visit ended with no dramatic reconciliation, no promises of restored relationship, just the beginning of a long, uncertain process of understanding. I walked out feeling lighter somehow, as if having faced the source of my deepest pain had diminished its power over me. Back at Riverside Gardens, life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Walter and I expanded our social circle, joining a senior bowling league and community garden club. I resumed fishing, something I had loved before but had abandoned during my working years when time was scarce. Harold proved an enthusiastic fishing partner, though he had less patience than the sport required. My relationship with Sophia and Alexander grew cautiously but steadily. I never tried to replace Jackson in their lives, but I offered support and connection when needed. Watching Alexander grow gave me a joy I had thought permanently lost. As my first year of freedom and recovery drew to a close, I found myself sitting on the patio one evening, watching the sunset with Walter. "Did you ever think we'd end up here when we were stuck in that dump?" he asked. "Never in a million years," I admitted. "I thought my life was over." "Goes to show you never can tell," he said, raising his coffee mug in a toast. "To second chances." I raised my own mug in response. "To second chances." The betrayal would always be part of my story, a scar that would never completely fade. But it no longer defined me. What defined me now was resilience, the family I had found, and the purpose I had discovered in helping others avoid similar fates. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a devastating betrayal? Or do you know someone who has experienced elder abuse from family members? Your stories and thoughts matter. Please leave a comment below sharing your experiences or insights. And, if this story moved you, or you think it could help someone else recognize the warning signs of elder exploitation, hit that like button and share it with others who might benefit. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and justice. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my journey.